Hello and welcome back to Outside the Perimeter. This is the place where we are talking to the innovators, the people who are building exciting stuff all across the cybersecurity space. So if you're a leader in IT and you want a good, open, honest conversation with no jargon, no waffle, hopefully this is the place for you to be. Now, I'm David Taylor, founder and managing director of Aruga Cyber, and today we have a very interesting guest, someone that I've known for a while and someone I've wanted to come onto the podcast for a while. He's got a very interesting background. He's building a really exciting product. So today I would like to welcome Lewis Holt from ESprofiler.
Hey, David. How's it going? Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for joining. As I said, really excited about this conversation. I think it'll be a good one because you're obviously building something really unique and it's solving a real problem, which I suppose is what it's all about. But before we kind of get into that and deep dive on what it is you're building and how it does help organizations of different sizes, why don't we start with you? We know you've worked in counter-terrorism, you've been involved in high-tech policing, and now you're building a really, really innovative product to help with security stacks. So why don't you just give us a quick overview of who you are, what you've done in the past, and what was the idea behind ESprofiler and what made you want to quit that full-time work to go and build it?
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Lewis. I'm the CEO and founder of ESprofiler. You're right. My background started in counterterrorism with cyber forensics. So I was doing everything from setting up all of the lab environments, all the networks, and then going out actually doing all of the investigations on the ground. Love that. Absolutely love that job. It was an amazing place to work. Had its own amazing challenges. Worked with some fantastic people. I kind of got more involved with government future planning as well around big cyber scenarios and terrorist incidents that might happen. It was really good. Ultimately, ended up finishing that role. Coming out of that, got headhunted into BT at the time. Joined their emergency response team for BT Protect Global. Again, that was a great team. Really kind of honed my teeth into more of the cyber incident side of things rather than static forensic analysis. That had its own set of challenges. What I found about myself was I loved building like capability. So I built all of the forensic retrieval kits, these little microcomputers that would ship all over the globe to capture evidence and plug into networks and things like that. And then as that evolved, I got more interested in kind of engineering side of things. So I worked on all of the high volume data analytics and internal security products, which was fun. So that was 1 in 1,000 packet monitoring. Yeah, just looking at the size and scale of someone like BT's core networks for threats. It was a fun challenge. And then I took a bit of a leap of faith out of that, which was an interesting jump. And I think that's what's given me a really kind of weird set of experiences that are probably unique-ish in that I got introduced to Symantec. And basically one of the problems that they were realizing that they were having was they were, for anyone who's not familiar with it, Symantec built a pretty incredible portfolio of security products, everything from web, email, endpoint, and things like web isolation technologies. There's literally everything across a lot, DLP encryption, you name it. And they would often sell these big ELA deals, which was you get access to everything as part of a license subscription. So customers who were looking to consolidate could go on those journeys. And basically, they had a problem in that when they were selling these deals, often customers would not adopt the technologies very well on the ground. They wouldn't see value out of them. And you ended up with a churn situation. And the effort that went into getting these deals was so large that they came up with this idea that they were going to put residents on the ground with customers. And this is a role that I then jumped into, which was really interesting because one, first time working with a vendor. Two, I was literally being put on the ground inside some of the most biggest and advanced organizations out there. So banks, financials, insurance. You basically go in, you get the C-level view of the world, which is great. And one of the most beautiful things about that job was it wasn't like a normal job. Like you weren't, this is your department, this is where you work. It was go in and make this valuable and make sure the customer's happy with it, which meant that you worked at every level from C-level conversations all the way down to who's actually running it on the ground and the engineers. I absolutely love that job. And we'll get into it later on in this call of kind of how that unfolded. But after that, decided that I was going to do that a bit more consistently after the Broadcom acquisition. So I did it as a private consultant through Channel. So I was supporting VARs, Channel, loads of different vendors across different sectors. And it just really got me a good breadth of customers. And I just kept seeing the same problems everywhere I went. It kind of inspired me to build ESprofiler.
Yeah, brilliant. That's some journey you've had, some career, lots of interesting things.
It was good. I think it gave me a good rounded experience as to, and before that, I was kind of hustling before even doing counter-terrorism, things like IP CCTV systems and stuff at uni, trying, right, everyone was getting bar jobs. I was fitting supermarket IP CCTV stuff and doing all the networking and component stuff. So I love building stuff.
Yeah. I suppose the good thing about you having such a varied past in terms of what you've done with counter-terrorism and government stuff, but then also working within customer environments, and you described it there as having a top-down view. So you've seen all angles within a business about how different departments operate, the different challenges that they've got there. So what's the one main challenge that you noticed, which you were like, do you know what, I reckon I can solve that? And that led you on to start an ESprofiler?
Yeah, there's a bit of a winding path as to how it started, but there was three things that really just struck me. The first one, which is evident in large organizations, was you just ended up with a massive amounts of tool sprawl. They just had everything, like leadership changes. I think the stats are something like 18 months tenure on CISOs, but in more established, big enterprise organizations, usually longer. But what you see is like decisions are made, through the cost of an organization to buy and invest in different security technologies. Often those decisions are reactionary or based on a regulatory requirement, something else like that. And what I just saw everywhere was just often they just had plethora of tools, and some of them weren't being used. There was instances of, entire like IDS, IPS technologies that were sat in warehouses that they were still, this was the most nuts one that I ever came across was, entire massive amounts of tin that was ready to go and deployed in a data center. So, like I say, IPS technologies. They were sat paying the supplier for storage costs because they spent that long to even receive the goods. Not only was the tin out becoming end of life, but they were still paying the storage costs on it. And like that, there were so many instances of they've got all this technology. Security is there as ultimately there is the business of revenue protection. And there's all this kit that they've got that's just not being used. So not only was the tools sprawl, but there was capability that was there that was not being used. And every incident that I got involved in, 9 out of 10 times, there'd be someone who'd turn around and say, oh yeah, I knew this had happened because of X. And it'd be like, that's nuts. That's just absolutely nuts that you've got this capability. It's not deployed in the best possible way. You're buying it. There's got to be something there in terms of bringing this picture together. So that was where the initial driver came together is, well, how's that problem actually coming about? And I could even tell you some, maybe we'll get into it, but there's an inflection point where we took a customer across to Symantec Experience Center in San Francisco, and we'd done this to try and make the customer kind of more connected to the engineering teams and feel more part of what was going on in the security company, build that relationship up, and also let the customer express some of their concerns. So I was part of organizing all of the leadership from a global financial organization to go out there. And we had the best product managers, the best engineers presenting all these features. And, someone stood up at the end of it, one of the leadership team, and just went, this is amazing, but, how does it actually improve my security organization? It was like, hang on a minute, this is one of the most advanced organizations in the world at the time. Yeah. And this is one of the most advanced security business organizations at the time in the financial space. We're sat there asking, how does this improve my security posture? So that was like one of the inflection points of like, holy crap, like, well, if they can't even understand everything that they've got and what it does and how it overlaps, then have you even got hope in hell's chance to start that? And that was where I thought,
Yeah, no,
here.
it's a great point. In fact, there's a few different avenues we could go down here with a conversation, but I think it'd be good for the audience as well, because you've set the scene brilliant there in terms of what the problems are and where in the business the problems sit. So why don't you just give us a quick, very high level overview of how ESprofiler is helping that? How is it helping businesses track spend and save money? And then we'll kind of dig into it a little bit deeper down those different avenues once we've gone through that.
Yeah, so there's three things to think about. And I'll get on the journey of like the journey I've been on about understanding the buying audience and the whole of the nuances of that. That's a fun story as well. But three things, building a catalog, a portfolio of every security capability the organization's got, so building that kind of master list. Every organization I've been in is, security is not just in the security buying sphere anymore. Like GitLab, GitHub's got, security capabilities. E5, E7 from Microsoft is not normally bought by the security team. It's cross-charged across, for example. But you see this across all organizations, in that security capability at an organization level can exist across different departments, different tools. So building that centralized catalog of what do we have and what the capabilities it provides is number one. So if you've got security leaders sat there and architects who are saying, well, we don't even have that central knowledge stack, that's kind of your point one, is building that and maintaining that and linking that to kind of a managed list of products. And that goes after the what do we have? And then element two, or question two, then obviously surfaces, which is, well, I've got all this stuff, but how is it, am I getting value out of it? How is it actually deployed on the ground? Where's the risks? Where's the opportunities that live out of it? So that's point two. So we go after, well, I've got this stuff. Am I getting value out of it? How is it operating on the ground? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? And fun story on that. I went, for example, really, really just hone this in. You can go and speak at leadership level. They get this filtered down view of the world because they have to. They got less time. We've got web controls. We've got DLP. We've got this amazing web-based security stack. And then you go and speak to the engineers on the ground, and they're like, yeah, legal prevented us from intercepting all these things. Our policy's a mess. We made a decision to base our interception policy on browser agent strings because it was too difficult to roll out PKI across the whole estate to legacy devices and stuff. So it's like, holy crap, like they've not got this. You've just got to change a user agent string. You can bypass all of these controls. So that point two is all about, how do you get that information? That's what we also address. And then point three is help the customer get in front of the decisions that they need to make. So remove that decision paralysis. And we take all the commercials. So when does it end? How much does it cost? And work backwards from that. How long would it take to replace this technology inside of this business based upon who they are and what the tech is? And that creates this concept of decision windows. And then automating all of the analysis around things that architects would usually need to spend a lot of time on to say, does this still make sense? Should you make a decision elsewhere? What are the alternatives in the market, and so on? And that's the three things that we go after. What do I have? How's it actually working on the ground? What are the risks and opportunities as a consequence? And how do I get in front of those decisions? So that was a long-winded answer.
No, it's good. It explains it nicely. So let's keep on the kind of the commercial theme now, because that's kind of what it's all about, isn't it? It's the title of the podcast. But I think this is a really interesting story, and I'm sure the guests will as well. So you've used an ESprofiler, been into a large organization and identified over 25 million in security spend, which is just absolutely mad. So without naming names, because I'm sure you probably can't do that, but do you want to just walk us through like what that was, how the process works, like what it was actually like on the ground, and just explain how a business ends up in that kind of situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously security is security budgets, it goes up to about 10% of IT budget. Some may be above or below that, but that's kind of like where it goes up to these days. So in some of the biggest organizations that are out there, the same problems that I raised, which is building a view of every capability that they've got, regardless of department, across the organization. Imagine an organization that's gone through mergers, acquisitions, things like that. it starts to get very messy very fast. And especially even when you've got, a global organization that's buying in different geographical regions, you end up with different strategies allowing to unfold in different parts of different spaces. So yeah, in this particular instance, our MO was go in, build an authoritative view of every security capability the organization's got, backed by, what are they buying? When does it actually commercially start? When does it commercially end? What is the cost? Doing all of things like the simple things like, okay, it was bought in US dollars, for example, translating all that back so that you've got that unified annualized view of costs across everything that you've got. And once you've got that authoritative list of everything that they've got, then able to go after, okay, well, how's it deployed on the ground? Build that view of the operational usage of it. And then what we then do is we're able to then go, okay, well, now we understand how it's been used. Now we understand all of the features and functionality of that technology. Let's now start to figure out where the operational overlap is inside of those technologies. So that's what we did. Then when we work backwards from that and you start to identify, we didn't realize we even had this capability. Oh, we had all of this overlap because, we were buying like Sneak and Veracode, and actually our AppSec teams already got, Security Copilot and SAS scanning and GitLab, for example. So when you pull back and pull that picture together, those sort of numbers don't actually seem that insane. And again, obviously, even when you do highlight that amount of overlap, there's still operational nuances in a customer journey to go on that journey to go forward. But the first step is building that view, building what they got, and creating that. So that one was a pretty insane.
Yeah,
wow, there's just so much of a spaghetti mess of, and you think about the decision paralysis that comes with that. You've got, if you unwind it, of the way the problem works is like, I'm a big customer. I have a spend requisition system like something like Coupa, Oracle, Dynamics, you name it. Every time someone's buying something in the organization, they raise a purchase request. They put justification in it. They follow whatever the business process does. Depending on costs, we'll go through all of those different gates. Well, those systems are not designed to track what the organization owns, right? They track the cost against the supplier, who's often computer centers, your WWTs, things like that. So even simple questions like, oh, how much are we spending against Microsoft? In Asia, Microsoft's transacting via X and this is transacting via Y. So the data inherently in those systems is free form, not designed to answer, how much money we're spending from X. So taking that data is one element that we can take in. And what we do is we've had to build like a catalog of every product that exists in the cyberspace to then scan those and go, well, that likely relates to this. And that allows us then to unpick, different sources of information like SDLC, asset data, which usually in most cases are completely out of date as well. So, they're still referencing blue coats and stuff like that. I know. Take all of that, normalize it into that master list, and then, basically then with that knowledge, figure out how it's actually deployed or being used on the ground. Then base a consolidation analysis off the back of it and use those commercial decision points to say, well, these are all the decision timeframes. So when you would need to make decisions based on notice periods, end dates, and so on. And that then gives you a plan in terms of these are the timeframes what you need to operate behind, and here's what you could focus on. But getting there is, it's a journey to unpick all of that. That's what we do.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I think you're right. It is an absolute journey because the bigger the business, the harder it is to do stuff like that. So if we were to kind of measure this in terms of doing it old school with some consultants going in manually doing everything, like what's the kind of, as well as the money saved at the end, what's the kind of the time saved by using a tool like ESprofiler?
Yeah, so we've been spending a lot of time on, obviously, like AI for us has unlocked a completely different way of thinking. So one of the elements, like I mentioned, was how do I replicate that experience that I had when I went into a business. I mentioned it earlier on the call. I spoke to security leadership. We got a view on what the web controls look like. It looked pretty good from that high level reporting aspect. And then I went and spent time, because I was in that unique position of that role. Like, you got to remember, these organizations are siloed. They're very siloed. You've got teams that work inside their orbits, and often, you have a security function that wraps over the top of it. But not often do everyone talk to everyone unless it's like a post-incident review or something's unpicking. So how do you replicate going in on the ground, going speaking to like a network engineer who's running the proxies, and being like, tell me what's going on, how it's implemented, like what's your pain points, if you was to rip that out, what would be the problem, and just have that conversation. Now, if you unpick that as to what you'd have to do, especially if it was a consulting engagement, and that's a really good analogy for this, is you'd have to go away, understand what that product is that you're going to have a conversation. So imagine, David, you're the network engineer, you're running, what would be like Broadcom web secure gateways now. We then sat there trying to figure out, well, what is this technology? What are all its features? How could it be used? And I'm going to have to go and learn that before I can then go and have a conversation with an expert on the ground. So one of the ways we accelerate that, and obviously that takes up your time, is we do all the research on all the products already. So we maintain that catalog of 27,000 plus products now. And then any product in that stack, we can then align all of the people that are in the orbit of that. So, just because you're the engineer on that product might not mean you're the owner. It might not mean that you're the analyst who's then looking at events coming out of it. So there's an orbit of people that are around the security stack. Some of them running it, some of them using the outputs from it, and so on. So what we then developed is agents that can effectively act as experts on the organization and on that product, and then basically take a directive and steer from ourselves to understand risks, opportunities, findings, or something custom specific to the customer, and go and have all these async conversations, right? So rather than having a load of FTEs deployed, grads on the grounds, booking meetings in diaries, sitting there with spreadsheets, we can now have all these conversations en masse without the energy and effort of doing that. You can basically pop open a very similar chat interface to what you're doing with Claude or ChatGPT, but it works in reverse. So rather than you talking to it, it's basically understanding what your role is, understanding what the org is, and then driving a conversation to understand how things work. Even lets you share evidence back into it, for example. But that lets us do this, in like a fixed time of like 4 to 6 weeks, for example. Go in, take all in outputs, throw it into the product, analyze what they've got, reach out to all the stakeholders en masse, and do what would normally be a massive month-long engagement, deeper, wider, and on a OPEX cost basis to start with. Right? The acceleration on that front is pretty insane. So that it's modeled around that same idea of what I used to do.
Yeah, no, great answer. And what I've found through like doing this podcast, but also speaking to people when we're doing stuff with the Ruby Cyber and stuff like that, is there's a common thread that I often see that appears. And we discussed it in our first episode, actually, with Luke Collinson, where he used the analogy of nobody ever gets fired for buying CrowdStrike. When me and you have had a chat before, you did the same, but you said IBM rather than CrowdStrike, again, two big name vendors. And it is a thing, I suppose, where it's a sense of security, and as a CISO or as a business leader, you're going to go with those more recognized tools. But as we know, that can also cause issues, and it can create the problem of the overlap, which you already mentioned in there. So what would you say to a CISO right now who tells you that that's just the way that they have to work and they have to go after the big names and they have to follow what everybody else is doing in the industry?
That's a really good question. That, I mean, I don't think they're wrong, right? If you look at the buying mentality, I mean, there's probably more fun conversations around this, right? Which is like, would I ever want to be a CISO? And I put some thought into that. Obviously, you've got different career trajectories, and I just think it's such a tricky job, isn't it? In terms of, you've obviously seen CISOs being prosecuted out in the state side, which completely didn't agree with. But you're ultimately taking on a role of business revenue protection. You got to justify a budget back to your board and maintain that of why that works. And trying to do all the risk quantification and however the business methodology that CISO follows to basically justify that spend. But often, like let's say you're a new impost CISO just going into a new role, starting a new one, like you're inheriting a load of decisions from people before you. Like, and then you've got all of this pressure on top of you of even if you get the job right, like it's not like, the CTO or the CEO of the business who's delivered a crap load more revenue. It's like, great, the business has not been destroyed. We've not had a massive hack. Like no one's sitting there like having these parties and celebrating kickoffs and sales wins and things like that. So it's like a bit of a wonderful. I've done my job. I've managed to protect the organization, and it's like a thankless sort of job in a way with a lot of stress that sits behind it. So when you start to think about, their own kind of pressures around, not getting fired for buying IBM, not getting fired for buying the Gartner right quadrant. So 100% it's a right sort of thought process. But equally, there's a lot of innovation that happens in smaller startups because those startups are founded based upon problems that are on the ground, right? That they've seen, often real business problems, and that evolves. So you've got a lot of innovation there. But it is definitely a balancing act. For us, for example, and you can think a CISO could end up buying a technology that makes sense for that problem statement at that time. 3 to 4 years later, it might not make sense again. Yeah. So for us, we're trying to go after it with a kind of from a CISO empowerment perspective of building that inventory of everything that you've got, and then how much it costs, how's it actually deployed, does it make sense as the decision when renewal comes up. It's basically job protection around defending the budget, defending what you have, a business tool for the CISO. That's kind of like
that's a brilliant answer. Now let's flip it the other way. So we discussed it from kind of the CISO level, but if we start kind of lower down, I suppose, because we've had this conversation and what you said really stuck with me, which is why I want to ask it now. Is
sure.
After a breach, somebody in the organization will always say, I knew that was going to happen. And that's because before the breach happened, people knew things were wrong, but they never asked the right questions. They never spoke up. Like, is that what you've experienced? And if so, how are you guys fixing that kind of problem?
Yeah, I would, obviously did emergency response with BT ages ago. I can't speak to what that organization is like now, but at the time it was doing a lot of mergers, acquisitions, right? So it was, a lot of people think BT is just a UK-based company. It's not. It's, it's all over the planet and does all of the interconnect for MPLS and stuff like that. So it was an interesting beast because it had a lot going on inside of it. But often, like even in that organization, incident had happened, you'd finally get in certain post-incident reviews or talking to people on the ground, and they'd be like, yeah, this had absolutely happened because this was poorly implemented. The project failed to deliver this, or config stopped us from doing this because of a legal problem. There's usually always something that pops up. And in other organizations, people on the ground knowing that they've got capabilities, but it's been poorly implemented. IPSs that are hanging off span ports instead of being in line, and projects that didn't deliver and they run over budget and stuff and just cut corners in delivery. It's an institutional level of stuff going on. How do you get your fingers on that is the point. Your previous way of doing that was maybe you go and do a big defense in depth engagement from a big four. You bring them in, you pick a specific scope, you go after that scope, and then do the same sort of exercise of talking to everyone on the ground to unpick that. And basically, even if someone, even if you ask a question, I could be like, to you, David, you're focused in your world. You're operating a product, and I say to you, are you using this capability, or how are you getting on with that? That little nugget of how you're using something or how it was implemented from a wider scope might be a security risk. And we only know that because we've asked you the right questions about the technology and how it's being used. So how we do that is like I said before, we've created agents that effectively, I'm really proud of it because it's something that's pretty awesome. We've seen it unfolding now more and more in our deployments. But an agent can say, David, can you understand that you work at, insert company X? It can be pumped with all the context of what that company is and all of its locations, its technology, for example. And you just explain to me what your role is. And you might turn around and say, well, I run the product, I'm a SOC analyst or something else like that. And then I'm going to change my questioning based on my knowledge of the product and your role to understand it. So if you're a SOC analyst, I might be asking more about the log output and whether you got everything you need to do to correlate information and do a proper investigation on the mail output. So this is kind of like what we're doing is basically swapping out a person going in on the ground, uncovering all of that institutional knowledge to pick that out. And that problem that we said that, there's every engagement I can ever think back to, there's always some folder with someone going,
Yeah.
I knew this would happen, or, oh yeah, this is a problem because of X. And it's like, wow, like it's nuts. Or yeah, we had the capability, but we never switched it on.
Yeah. No, good, great. Let's just following on from that, the reason I want to ask this question is because I think it would be really good for the guests who are listening. So we'll ask this, and then as we're getting near to the end, I've got some quick fire questions which I'll fire at you. But as I said, nothing to be worried about.
No.
But if the answer to solving business problems in cybersecurity space is not just about buying more tools, do you want to just describe how, based on your experience and in your opinion, what does a well-run security stack actually look like within a business?
Yes, that's a great point. So a well-run one is one that's basically focused on revenue protection, right? That's what that's what I believe cyber really boils down to. So I think Ross Young has got a great CISO Tradecraft podcast as well that he runs, and he's got a good book on this, which I really align with. You wouldn't spend £1 million protecting something that's worth £1,000, right? So you've got to start with that mentality of like, what's producing the revenue? Where should we be focusing our time? What happens if something goes down, right? So building a stack that focuses on those problem statements and then modeling backwards from that is a great starting point. And then making sure that you're getting all of the value from that stack. So, we've sort of gone in this wave of defense in depth back to consolidation and customers recognizing that running all of these different tools has a massive operational overhead on it. So that balancing act of getting the most value out of what you've got and making sure it's actually deployed and in use on the ground, again, is a great thing to start at. The amount of customers that I've seen with all these capabilities and they're barely leveraging them, it's just wasted potential. So going after that again is a great answer to it.
Yeah, no, great answer again. And as with all of these conversations, what I'm finding is, as soon as we start, I just feel like we could go on for ages talking about more. I've actually got more questions.
I feel like
since the last guest, I've not had a chance to ask them all because the conversation's been so good. But let's just change pace a little bit, and I'll go for some quick fire questions, which are just a bit of fun, really. So, what would you say? And I think this is probably ties in perfectly with what you do. What is the most overrated item on a security budget?
The most overrated item on a security budget. Oh, that's a really good question. No, I don't want to answer that and trash any security vendors or stacks out.
Yeah, no, don't do that.
Right. For me, the biggest thing is what I came back to is having underutilized value that's already at your disposal in the stack. That's the biggest thing for me is if you're sat there with all of this stuff that got implemented and then you've moved on, like remember that every tool that you buy is not like a tool in the shed. It's evolving capabilities. Every vendor's rapidly adding pace. And right now, where we are with AI and everything else, the rate and pace of development is insane. Like the thing that you bought 6-7 months ago might not be the same thing today. People just don't check back in on that stuff. So that for me is making sure that you're squeezing every bit of value from your existing stack. That's the biggest thing to focus on.
Bro. And the next one, I've asked this to everybody. I quite like this one. What's the biggest myth in cybersecurity right now? I think last time we got GDPR.
Yeah, I think for me the myth is that you can protect against everything and just have like a perfect stack. You know, you read the analogy that you know an attacker's only got to be right once. So especially now, it's like we're moving into the space of you know frontier models providing capabilities to fraudsters, hackers, script kiddies, you know, like people lower down that pyramid are now getting capabilities that were reserved for state-sponsored capabilities. And what that means is, you know, if they find a chink in the armor of, you know, the apps that are public facing or things that are running, or even, you know, like the VPN with a 0 day, or we're even seeing security products having vulnerabilities and being exploited now, which is ironic. But what comes next if you move into that assumed breach world? Like, you know, once you get into the middle of it, it's those things that are poorly deployed, or those people that I mentioned at the start who are, hey, this is a problem because of X. Like that's the stuff that's ultimately going to end up getting popped and popping up in the next breach. So I
Yeah,
think
no,
that's
cool. And then, as we're
good
getting right to the end now, where can people find you and ESprofiler if someone wants to get in touch or they want to see what you're doing? How can they do that?
Yeah, a website's always a great starting point, but I'd always say to anyone, like, if anyone wants to reach out to me personally, feel free to on LinkedIn. You know, respond to everything on there. Drop me an email. Email's straightforward. It's just lewis.holt@esprofiler, and I'll respond to anything directly. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
easiest way to grab us.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed that conversation. And if anybody listening has listened to that and thought it sounds very familiar, we're having the same issues within our organization, then as Louis says, please do reach out, give me a message on LinkedIn or go through the website. And also, similarly, if you want to keep up to date with the podcast, who our next guest is going to be, then please follow Aruga Cyber on LinkedIn. And we announce every episode every month, as we're doing them every 30 days or so. So please join us on there. But until then, thank you very much for joining us again. I'm David Taylor, and thank you for being outside the perimeter.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.